The sight of it made me almost let go of my phone. At first, I couldn't believe the tweet because it was so daring and shocking. Still, I continued to investigate. What I found, though, made me feel sick to my stomach as I stared at my computer. This report has the potential to completely change the game for XRP if it turns out to be accurate. The coin could be on the brink of a big supply shock. And if you happen to have any XRP on hand, even a small amount, this is the type of moment that will be remembered as the tipping point. Your money is not being advised by this. I just want to say one thing before I get into the narrative. I put up a special product called the XRP Millionaire Blueprint if you want to look at the docs, infographics, and videos that explain everything in detail and show how everything fits together. You may find the link in the pinned comment below this video. It's all organized and presented in a clear and organized manner. If you want the whole story told in an understandable manner, you should look it up. Okay, let's get back to the plot. Suddenly, a well-known figure in the XRP community jumped out at me as I scrolled through the Bird app, Van Winkle's Ripple. The XRP supply isn't what people assume, and he's literally shouting it. The majority of it has already been reserved. The major players are feasting on the leftovers, while small-scale investors like you and me are squabbling over crumbs. Subsequently, he began dropping figures, concrete figures. I realized I had to start digging in at that point. As you can see, Ripple has placed around 35.3 billion XRP in escrow on its own. That is directly stated in their reports, thus it is not an idle hearsay. Then there are the additional 3.5 billion XRP that Ripple has in cold storage. The founder, Chris Larsen, has an estimated net worth of over $2.3 billion. Another $1.5 billion, Arthur Brito. Therefore, 42 billion XRP are currently held in strong hands. More than 40% of the supply has been effectively taken out of circulation. Now things start to become wild. The portion of XRP that is truly liquid and moving about is significantly smaller than anyone realizes, according to analysts, when you include retail institutions and exchanges. Retail investors may own as little as 15% of the supply, according to some estimates. 1 in 5. Just 15 billion XRP out of a total of 100 billion are in the possession of regular people like us. Hold just a second while you consider it. A pizza party is taking place. When you and your pals walk in, you think there are 8 slices. On the other hand, we had already had 4 slices before you arrived. Now the other members of the party are vying for the remaining resources. Right now, that's XRP. There was plenty according to everyone. However, the remaining resources appear to be quite small when considering Ripple's holdings, the founder's wealth, and the fact that institutions are now showing interest, and establishments are nipping at it. Approximately 29.6 million XRP are held by the Canadian fund Purpose Investments. 45 million are held by 3iQ, another asset management. Those are just the beginning. When compared to the billions, it may not sound like much. Once XRP spot ETFs launch, consider the impact of major players like BlackRock, Fidelity, and JP Morgan becoming involved. The nibbling stops there. Their hunger is sated. When we're discussing exchange-traded funds, let's pause for a moment. For widespread use, spot ETFs are in need. They facilitate the easy transfer of XRP from traditional brokerage accounts held by institutions with trillions of dollars in wealth, wallet not set up. Exchange signups are not being accepted. Like buying Apple or Tesla shares, it's as simple as clicking a button. Plus, the timing is spot on. Many are predicting that the first spot XRP ETFs will launch in October. If that occurs, the supply will be severely limited, leading to a tidal surge of demand. A shocking twist occurs at this point in the plot. Foreign currency reserves. Look at the exchange wallets if you want to know if a currency is getting scarce. Plus, I had to make sure I wasn't misreading what happened on Coinbase. As of June, a total of 970 million XRP were stored in 52 separate cold wallets on Coinbase. There are around 1 billion tokens that are currently idle. 2 wallets remain as of September 20th. Exactly 32 million XRP all at once, and now it seems even those are false. Coinbase's XRP cold storage went from roughly 1 billion XRP to nothing in just a few months. Consider that for a moment. Exchanges function similarly to the aisles of a supermarket. Nobody freaks out when they're in stock, but as stock starts to run low, customers will go crazy to get their hands on what's left. Moreover, with XRP, those shelves are seeming more and more empty daily, and that's not all. Recently launched projects such as Flare Network and Axelar are intentionally designed to lock up XRP. Real XRP must be deposited as collateral in order to use those wrapped versions. Locked items are no longer available for purchase. The demand for these variants that are wrapped has been absolutely crazy. Within hours of its inception, Flare's FXRP, which capped at 5 million XRP, was sold out. What is their broader objective? Putting 5 billion XRP on lock. When you add in Axelar's ideas, it's possible that another 13% of the supply will be eliminated. Permit me to reiterate that. There is rapidly becoming less XRP available for purchase due to factors such as Ripple's escrow, the founders' hoards, institutions nibbling, the disappearance of exchange reserves, and the introduction of new DeFi ventures that consume supply. It hit me at that very second. You can't just call this a coin with partnerships, quick transactions, or practical uses. In a stealthy manner, XRP is running low. The result is certain if there is a combination of increasing demand and a limited supply. Occasionally, the price has to change dramatically. I am not here to bombard you with random numbers. Those outlandish $500 or $1,000 forecasts have been seen by everyone. What I mean is very straightforward. No trillion-dollar asset manager will engage in a bidding war with Ripple to acquire XRP for their exchange-traded fund ETF. Defeating us is their goal. Retail is at war with them over that minuscule 15% share. The water level in the pond will drop rapidly once the whales begin to drain it. Also, I can tell you that the water level is going down. The market's mindset is changing at a rate that most people can't keep up with, and XRP is right in the middle of it. Institutions, regulators, and exchanges aren't idling away their time. The current system for transferring funds into and out of digital assets is being redesigned on purpose. Regardless of how retail investors feel about it, XRP is being positioned as the bridge. And this is the most important aspect that most people fail to notice. Give this some thought. Hype cycles, speculative inflows, and retail-driven mania have propelled the majority of coins in each bull run thus far. After Bitcoin and Ethereum, the remaining altcoin market participants followed suit. However, the storyline of this cycle is essentially distinct. We are not referring to the next stage of growth being driven by memes. We are referring to the process of implementing a new structure. The type of adoption that remains firmly attached to the systems of payments, settlements, and compliance upon which global institutions rely on a daily basis, rather than vanishing as soon as the novelty wears off. And XRP is unique in that regard. This has nothing to do with your opinion on Ripple or their partnerships. When governments and central banks are actively experimenting with solutions that integrate with RippleNet or XRP ledger infrastructure, it is no longer considered conjecture. The framework for demand driven by utilities is being established. The actual flashpoint is in the interactions themselves, so let's focus on those now. For the time being, retail traders are under the impression that XRP buy and sell buttons will remain available on Binance, Coinbase, and Kraken. However, in an institutionalized setting with substantial liquidity, that assumption is disregarded. It is not the design of exchanges to deal with large-scale systemic liquidity crises. Under typical volatility scenarios, they are designed to connect retail buyers and sellers. There will be no public order books where you may randomly purchase XRP when the liquidity flood comes. Private liquidity corridors, institutional desks, and market makers with whom they already have agreements will instead receive the vast bulk of that flow, completely avoiding retail. Because of this, many continue to express concern that XRP will eventually be completely removed from retail exchanges. The ban isn't the reason. Rather, retail will be unable to participate in the resulting shift in volume and pricing action. We know what that looks like from past events. The supply on exchanges always goes down if an asset unexpectedly gains institutional interest. It happened with Bitcoin toward the end of 2020 when services like Grayscale, PayPal, and Square began buying up Bitcoin. Because there was so little available, retail buyers were driven to pay ever-increasing prices as exchange supply hit multi-year lows. Next, magnify that same dynamic and apply it to XRP. With its focus on liquidity, XRP stands apart from Bitcoin. That implies the absorption rate will accelerate at a rate no one is predicting when large financial institutions, payment providers, or exchange-traded funds begin adopting it. Because the standard order books will become unstable due to the supply imbalance, the exchanges will either restrict trading, lock down withdrawals, or discreetly delist pairs when that happens. The majority of retail investors will freak out if this happens. It will appear as though XRP is being censored or eliminated. The truth is that the reverse is true. The public exchanges are left with nothing as the hidden market takes over. This isn't a pipe dream, as anyone who has been following settlement news, CBDC pilots, and liquidity hub testing will tell you. That's what one should do next. For a moment, let's shift gears and discuss psychology. Everyone always seems to underestimate how quickly things are moving during a bull run. Many individuals rationalize not purchasing Bitcoin when its price skyrockets from $10,000 to $40,000 in a span of weeks. They pause, think, and then commit, but by then the relocation is already 80% done. The liquidity shock caused by XRP will result from both the speculative excitement surrounding the coin and the systematic withdrawal of supplies from exchanges, making this reality much more severe. That implies you won't merely be tardy, you will be completely denied access. Consider the paradox. The XRP holders have been the target of mockery and contempt for a long time, with claims claiming the switch flip is a hoax. What is currently being built, however, is basically that switch. A shift in liquidity that will happen more quickly than the typical investor can respond to. The new tracks will be up and running before retail even notices. Examining the sequence in which legal and regulatory processes occur should dispel any doubt that what is being said here is not conjecture. In its long and drawn-out SEC case, XRP was effectively muzzled and institutions were scared away. The verdict that XRP is not a security for secondary sales gave the go-ahead nonetheless. Markets were relisted, the liquidity hubs resumed their testing. Not all exchange-traded funds, ETFs in the US, have directly invested in XRP, but some have begun to incorporate it in their baskets of holdings. That order isn't arbitrary. Building the scaffolding for integration is what it is all about. Also, this is something that the majority of people fail to notice. There is a permanent shift in the nature of liquidity flows once an asset is included in regulated ETF products. Traders on Binance and Bybit are no longer the only ones who can influence price discovery. There are now creation-redemption processes, authorized players, and custodians removing supplies from circulation. For institutions, it means less volatility, but for retail, it means more scarcity. Once XRP enters that ecosystem, inexpensive accumulation will be a thing of the past. This is the harsh reality. You won't have enough time to respond if the majority of you listen now. Your mind will wander. The confirmation will be sent to you. When the price drops again, you'll tell yourself you'll buy. Unfortunately, the supply needed for dips is bound up in institutional pipelines, so they won't happen in the manner you're picturing. That's why it's crucial to grasp the idea of XRP disappearing from exchanges. There is no terror. Mathematically speaking, it is. Now we can speculate on the outcome after the switch is turned on. Imagine this. The XRP liquidity corridors for interbank settlements, treasury management, and remittances go operational overnight. At the same time, order books are getting thinner on exchanges. Fees for cashing out increase. Price pairings do not move. Next, the news stories will appear. Shortage of XRP funds, need from institutions increases dramatically. A disruption in supply is currently taking place. The retail sector will react frantically, but it will be too late. Why? Because those who position themselves before the flood, the patient holders, will be in a completely different reality than others who are chasing after. Whenever a major asset class moves from a speculative to an adoption phase, we see this same pattern. Somehow, the people who were made fun of for clinging on have become the ones no one can catch. All right, let's take this a notch further. Electronic money issued by central banks. No one can agree on whether CBDCs will bring crypto to its knees or render it obsolete. However, without liquidity bridges, CBDCs are worthless in real life. If they can't communicate with one another, they're like separate systems. Here's where the design of XRP becomes relevant. This asset will act as a go-between for several digital fiat systems. Also, the volume coming through won't be purely hypothetical once that switch is turned on. Monetarily, it will be on a sovereign level. When that happens, discussions about price targets take a whole new turn. While institutions are planning for settlement flows in the trillions, retail investors will continue to wonder if XRP will reach $5, $10, or $20. Exponential repricing is caused by such disparity. The multiples change dramatically when XRP is no longer seen as a speculative coin, but as a liquidity bridge for international finance. Thus, this is the final point. The removal of XRP from retail exchanges is definitely happening. It's bound to happen once the liquidity corridors are turned on a large scale. Being in a certain place before or after that occurs is the sole determining factor. If you've been keeping up, you should be able to see the plot assembling by now. In spite of the current crypto craze, XRP isn't your average altcoin. This arrangement is structural. With supplies decreasing and liquidity corridors being prepared, institutions are flocking like sharks in an already depleted pond. For those who are keeping tabs, the next development might have a profound impact. Let's dissect the schedule. To begin with, reserves have already begun to be depleted by trades. The amount of XRP held by Coinbase's cold wallets dropped from around 1 billion to almost nothing in just a few months. The rapid depletion of liquidity begs the question, what will happen when actual institutional demand arrives? The response is severe shortage. Following that, we will discuss spot ETFs. The debut of the first XRP spot ETFs to be authorized in the United States is now the subject of much interest. In contrast to exchange-traded funds, ETFs that merely monitor price changes, spot ETFs actually own the asset. This implies that millions, and eventually billions, of XRP will be taken off the market as these ETFs begin to amass assets under management. Retail inventory decreases. Real scarcity begins to be reflected in the price. Also, large organizations rarely purchase single items. They make purchases in the millions, and occasionally even tens of millions. Put it along with XRP projects that have been wrapped, such as MXRP and FXRP. These token lockups are not mere gimmicks, they are intentional. The collateral for each MXRP or FXRP that is created must be genuine XRP. More supply is going out of circulation, and scarcity is quietly increasing as a result. Furthermore, these locked positions may potentially constitute an additional 10 to 15% of the overall supply. Given the increasing demand for DeFi exposure, we can now include the psychological component. Investors in XRP have learned over the last 5 years to be patient. Keep going even when the SEC gets involved, prices drop, and exchanges list and relist XRP. There are a lot of holders out there that are ready to diamond hand their tokens because of how patient they are. Therefore, holding becomes the default rather than selling when scarcity strikes. The impact is amplified by that. A powerful formula for quick price appreciation is a reduced supply and committed holders. Now we reach the most intriguing part of the chronology. Institutions have had ample time to prepare, secure XRP from over-the-counter markets, and establish custodians in anticipation of the spot ETFS potential launch in late 2025. Thus, their movement will be abrupt. An aggressive initial surge is possible. At that very second, retail becomes acutely aware of the abrupt scarcity, withdrawals increase, and the exchange order books become much thinner. Consider the last time the value of Bitcoin's exchange reserves dropped to levels not seen in many years to get a sense of scale. There was a dramatic increase in price volatility. The fear of missing out was all anyone could talk about. Since there was a severe shortage of Bitcoin, buyers rushed to get their hands on the cryptocurrency at inflated prices. The situation could be worse for XRP due to its smaller overall market cap and circulating supply, but it would still be comparable. Large institutional purchases have a more noticeable relative influence. For a second, let's discuss the mechanics of pricing. There is a common linear way of thinking about price targets. Perhaps XRP will reach $5 next, as it is currently 2.90. Conversely, actions driven by scarcity tend to be exponential rather than linear. Coins cost more to acquire for each additional customer when supply is low and demand is high. That isn't just guesswork. So much for economic theory. Exchange depletion, DeFi's restricted supply, and institutional appetite all work together to make every additional buyer fight fiercely, which causes prices to skyrocket more quickly than what most retail models predict. The clarity of regulations and the timing of the SEC settlement should also be considered. That has been the subtle spark that ignites the whole chain reaction. Institutions are no longer compelled to hedge regulatory risk due to the elimination of legal uncertainty. That paves the way for widespread use, treasury applications, and ETF integration on a grand scale. The market is getting ready to speed up now that the way is clear. Sure, institutions may act swiftly in response to dwindling supplies, but how soon can we anticipate a reaction from the market? There is a hint in the past. Behold the crypto bull run that began in early 2021. In a matter of months, Bitcoin's value jumped from $10,000 to $64,000. Ethereum also experienced a boost. Part of the blame was on supply shortages in those instances. However, things are worse for XRP due to the fact that its liquid retail fraction is extremely tiny, perhaps as little as 15% of the overall supply. Due to its diminutive size, the float is extremely vulnerable to large inflows. Now we reach another crucial point: volatility. When resources are scarce, not only do prices rise, but they also fluctuate wildly. Due to coins being tied up in long-term positions or private institutional agreements, XRP may see short-term retracements, large spikes, and periods where it scarcely moves on exchanges. Depending on your tolerance for wild fluctuations, this may be either exciting or worrisome for holders. Additionally, we can incorporate adoption-driven utility. For liquidity reasons, banks, money transfer services, and international payment providers are already testing the waters with the XRP ledger. The case that demand is sustainable and not just speculative is strengthened with each real-world transaction that employs XRP. Because more coins are retained for operational purposes, this form of utilization not only supports higher prices, but also makes the market structurally tighter. Additionally, the DeFi angle is subtly increasing. The likes of MXRP and FXRP are merely the tip of the iceberg. A larger quantity of XRP will be locked as collateral as further protocols are introduced. A snowball hurtling down a hill is a good analogy. The current supply becomes more scarce, heavy, and fast-moving with the addition of each new project. This locked XRP, in contrast to speculative trade, is frequently not returned to circulation for months or even years, thereby eliminating it from the pool indefinitely. It ought to be obvious by now that we are not dealing with a single catalyst. A perfect storm has formed. All of these factors are coming together to create a huge structural squeeze: exchange depletion, institutional demand, ETF integration, DeFi locking, and continued adoption. For that reason, rumors and anticipation of supply shock scenarios are beginning to circulate in the community. Now we get to the part where mental toughness is useful. Those retail investors who grasp this dynamic will be well ahead of the game. Rather than a mad dash for cash, you should think about how to best position yourself in an ever-shrinking market. Instead of being emotionally swept away by the first big price spike, you may make rational decisions when you know the float is modest, that institutions are planning big movements, and that demand could increase quickly. In this case, timing is crucial. Minor shifts in liquidity may occur once every week in the days preceding possible ETF debuts or big adoption announcements. Institutions discreetly amass XRP, while some leaves exchanges for cold storage or is locked in DeFi initiatives. Additionally, the duration of this introductory period determines the potential severity of the subsequent shortage shock. The majority of people fail to notice this crucial lesson. A single price rise isn't all this is about. New levels of market dynamics are generated by supply shocks. First, when certain coins are temporarily unavailable, the retail market may experience a modest surge. A second surge of quick price increases may follow the start of ETF-related inflows. The market may enter a multi-month structural repricing phase where the price of XRP reflects true utility-driven scarcity rather than speculation. This will happen when institutional liquidity corridors fill and adoption becomes tangible. That is the ideal level for holders. You may have an advantage over newbies who try to follow the trend if you have a firm grasp of the regulations, are quick to adopt DeFi projects, and amass patience. Knowing when to act, how to wait, and how liquidity flows structurally are all crucial. One more perspective: network effects should be considered as well. Not only are XRP tokens valuable, but so are the ledger, the network, and the participants. Enhanced network activity is a direct result of the expansion of liquidity corridors, wrapped projects, and institutional convergence. The scarcity loop is self-reinforcing. Increased network activity usually draws greater institutional attention, which increases supply removal. A feedback loop can quickly develop from scarcity to adoption to even greater scarcity to higher perceived value. In layman's words, what does this mean? If this is how XRP develops, we will see a coin that isn't riding on the wave of social media enthusiasm alone. It's changing because real-time changes are redefining the basics of supply and demand. There is less in exchanges, there is a small retail sector. Authorities are prepared to intervene. DeFi has implemented a strategy to secure Bitcoin transactions. More and more people are opting to utilize it. For holders with a good grasp of these dynamics, the next 12 to 18 months may be a game changer. I have saved you years of trial and error by creating the XRP Millionaire Blueprint, which provides a detailed explanation of how to position, when to scale, and how to avoid the pitfalls that ruin 90% of investors. I lay out everything inside. Everything from the documents to the images to the scheduling methods to the precise frameworks that institutions are utilizing. It's organized, it's easy to understand, and it's designed to keep you one step ahead. Just below this video in the pinned comment, you'll see the link.